So hello, good morning people. Welcome to the second day of our annual conference. And because you are not the only one who is, the only ones who are going to listen and watch Jill's session, I'd like to ask you please to do the same thing as yesterday in the morning. Please turn up to the camera up there and wave energetically to the people in their homes and places. Hello! Now Andrea Toll from Cambridge University Press is introducing Jill Hadfield. Thank you.
Okay.
Andrea.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I hope you had a lovely evening and you've come today full of energy and a Saturday, and it's lovely to see you all on Saturday. So I have the pleasure of introducing you all to Jill Hadfield, who's come all the way from New Zealand. She lives in New Zealand. She's taught for many, many years. She's taught all over the world. She's taught in China, Madagascar, Tibet. She's written over 30 books, and today she's going to be looking at interactivities online. So I hope you enjoyed her session. Thank you, Jill.
Hello everybody, and I'd just like to begin by saying thank you for coming, and I'm really delighted to be here again at APPI. I had a lovely conference last year, and it really is a very, very APPI conference, so I'm very happy to be here. I'd like to say also thank you to Alberto for organising such a wonderful conference, and thank you to Cambridge University Press for sponsoring me to come and talk here. I'm going to be giving you some tips about online interaction, both for teaching online, for blended learning courses, but also even if you're teaching face-to-face, it might be a nice way to ring the changes on homework. Instead of giving written homework, you can use an online activity for students to practice English. It's a pretty practical talk. I'll be giving you lots of teaching tips for teaching online, but also some practical activities that you can take away and use, or even better, that might give you some ideas for creating your own activities for your own learners and for your own situations. Okay, interaction. Just think for a minute, what does that mean to you? If I was to say interaction, what picture would come into your mind? Just very quickly, tell the person next to you. Interaction, what picture does it give you? So, how many people said people talking together? How many people said people talking? And how many people said something to do with computers? Okay, I've taken these definitions from Cambridge University, Cambridge Dictionary Online. Interact in the first place meant to communicate with or react to other people. But more and more, excuse me, if you look at the adjective interactive, an alternative meaning has become more in use, involving computers. An interactive computer program involves the user in the exchange of information while the computer is in operation. And in fact, my co-author Lindsay did this, not me, but he said that if you type the word interactive into Google image search, the first 3 pages of images that come up are not people interacting, but people interacting with computers. Okay? Isn't that amazing how the word has changed? However, the rise of the word interactive in education and education technology. There's quite a big marketing push in EdTech, I don't know if you've noticed, and interactivity has come to mean more and more interaction between human and machine. It's become to equate with learning rather than teaching. And they promote interaction as a new way of learning, and educational technology as modern, and face-to-face teaching as old. So teacher lectures, and there's quite a simplistic kind of equation between what goes on face-to-face in the classroom and the transmission style of teaching, which is the teacher talking. They seem to say that teacher lectures are bad, and interaction between humans and machine is learning, which is good. I'd like to read you a short quotation from two Norwegian academics, whose names I always forget. Says, Haugsback and Nordkveller say that interactivity is quite useful for marketing the new technology. The term had no commonly accepted meaning or definition, but a whole range of positive connotations made it acceptable for most people. One of the prominent ideas was interactive technology establishing and supporting new ways of learning, in contrast to established ones. Interactive technology should open up student activity, user control, and dialogue. The focus is put on learning rather than teaching, and the concepts of teaching and learning were introduced as a dichotomy, to a large extent based on very simple stereotypes of the two phenomena. Teaching as something bad we had to get rid of, and learning as something good we had to promote. Okay. So, I'm not going to be talking about that kind of interactivity. I'm going to call the interactivity between human and machine, we call weak interaction. And what I'm going to be talking about today is strong interaction, or interaction between human and human, although mediated by computers. There's been quite a lot of research into why people drop out of online courses, and most of the research points to the fact that there isn't enough interaction, i.e. not enough strong interaction between human and human. And people get disillusioned or bored or fed up, get dissatisfied, and drop out of courses because there isn't enough interaction between human and human. So we'll be looking this morning at ways of creating interaction between human and human, in I hope what are fun and interesting formats. So tools that facilitate strong interaction are often underused. For example, discussion forums and chat rooms. And often when they're used very often, more often in academic settings. And they're usually used in pretty much the same way. The students are given some readings to do, to go away and read at home, and then they have to give their opinions and discuss what they've read. So I'm going to be presenting some ways of ringing the changes on that formula for discussion. So the overview of what I'm going to say, I look first at some considerations before you begin activities with students. For example, which platform to use, some ideas for setting up and managing interaction, and some principles for task design for interactive activities. Then I'll be looking at during, which is the actual activities, and give you some examples of activities that you might like to use, or better still, to adapt for your classes. And after, I'll talk a bit about feedback and how you give feedback and assessment to the students after they've done the activities. So, looking first at interactive tools. There are several considerations when you're choosing a platform. For example, how easy will it be for the students to access the platform? And how familiar are they with this platform already? Obviously, if they're familiar with the platform, they'll find it very easy. We tried out several different platforms with students, some of which they found easy and some of which they found difficult. And it can get your activities or your teaching off to a bad start if you have to spend time continually explaining to students how to access the platform. So it's important to choose a platform that's easy and perhaps that the students are a little bit familiar with. Is it easy to find new messages? Is it easy to post messages to the group? Can you post private messages? I think this is quite an important one, and I'll show you why when I show you some of the more complex activities towards the end of the talk. Some platforms don't have a facility for students to post private messages to each other. Everything is public in the group. I think it's very important to have a private message facility so that you can divide the students into subgroups. So how easy is it to start and differentiate a new topic, or does everything get under the same heading? This is another very important one in my opinion. Is it possible and easy to upload images and videos? We tried one platform, Leforo, with the students, where it seemed very complicated to upload images. And if you're able to upload images or short videos easily, that can give you a much wider range of interactive tasks to do. Is it possible to pin a topic to the top of the page so you have a sort of subject heading? Can you view a discussion in a threaded manner, or is it linear? Is it possible for learners to edit or delete their posts if they regret something they've written? Quite important, that. And is there an optional like button for posts? So of all those considerations, in my opinion, the most important are how easy it is to access the platform. Is there a private message facility or a way of doing subgroups within the main group of students? And is it easy to upload videos? So if you just think of those three, in my opinion, those are the three most important criteria for choosing a platform. I move on now to look at certain considerations for setting up and managing online interaction. So right at the beginning, students need to know how to access the platform, how and where to find the tasks that you're setting, how and where to post to each other, how to reply to each other publicly so that everybody in the group can see, and how to send private messages only to one other person or maybe to two other people or three other people. Okay? To either send to a single person or to a group of people, a subgroup within the group. It's very important for you to give clear instructions. You can send an email to participants with a welcome message and instructions, and make your instructions clear and point by point. For example, 1, go to lefora.com and click on sign up. 2, follow the instructions on the screen to make an account. They'll send you a confirmation email with a link. Okay? So numbered instructions are good, and written instructions to the students in the form of an email give them a reference point. Screenshots are helpful as well. Okay? So here's one with click here to comment. Set rules for engagement. It's very important to observe what we call netiquette, okay? Etiquette on the internet. So setting clear and simple rules, for example, respect the opinions and views of other people in the forum. Use names, for example, Francis said, please don't insult anyone in the forum or use rude language as a joke, okay? Even as a joke. Okay? It's quite important to make this very clear from the start. If you don't understand something, ask the person to explain it a different way. Avoid shouting, typing in capital letters, or getting angry and writing abuse online. And if you have a problem with somebody in the forum, let the teacher know in a private message. Another good thing to do, instead of setting the rules yourself, you can get the students to make them up. I've got a nice passage from a sort of 19th century etiquette book about good manners about 150 years ago. And I sometimes use that with the students and ask them how much of that is true today in everyday life, and how much is true, or would be true, how much is desirable to have on the internet. So it's a good idea for the students to make their own rules, and I think it's probably more powerful if it comes from the students. But certainly there needs to be something about not getting angry and not shouting online. During interaction, have clear instructions for the tasks. Use students' names. Encourage the participants to post profile pictures, so there's a little picture with their name. If they don't want to put their face, they can put a picture of something they like an animal or a flower, but just so they have something to identify them. Lead by example. Always give clear examples of what to do, and give praise to the students to encourage them to contribute. Nip problems in the bud. If you see a problem coming up, intervene before it gets to be a real problem. Set deadlines for tasks. That's very important, to give a clear deadline. For example, post your answer by 5 o'clock tomorrow. Or post your answer by 15th of February. Set a time and a date. And if interaction seems to be flagging, intervene to get it going again. But do be careful that you don't take over the whole activity. The activity is for the students to interact, not just you and one particular student. But if nobody seems to be contributing for a bit, intervene, join in a bit, try and get it going again. And finally, when the activity is finished, here are some ways of wrapping it up and giving closure to the activity. Summarize what people said. Just a short summary in your own words of the main points of what people have said during the activity. You can do the top 10 points from the activity in a list. You could do a series of quotes from the activity in a short video, a mind map or a word cloud showing the main points, a video of you talking through main points and discussing them, and it's important at the end to give participants a sense of achievement, to say well done and to praise them and say what was good about their interaction. Okay, a few points now, a few principles for designing interactive tasks. I put here 10 principles. I'll just go through probably the 5, what I consider the most important principles for designing tasks. Firstly, that they are between human and not between human and machine. The tasks should provide, this is point number 4 here, a reason for communication, to share information, opinions, values, or ideas. So there should be a real reason for communication between people. The next point, number 5, they should have a purpose, and I think this is quite important. They should have closure in an end point. The communication should achieve something. For example, the solution to a puzzle or the creation of a text or artifact. I think closure and the creation of something is very important. Firstly, it brings the activity to a natural close. You know when the activity is finished because the participants have done something, they've created something or they've found something out, and it means that the activity doesn't drag on. Secondly, I think there's a psychological reason as well for having closure and having achieved something with the activity. It gives people a very strong sense of satisfaction, and I think it leads to self-esteem and empowerment if you feel that you've actually used language to achieve something, whether it's solving a puzzle or creating a poem. It should involve, obviously, two-way participation. Members should take account of each other's contributions and contribute themselves. It should involve all members of the group, and it should involve a range of interaction types and a range of different task types and learner task preferences. So variety is very important for interest and also for learner preference. So those are the most important points out of those tasks. Okay. Now we'll come on to looking at the tasks themselves. I've divided interactive tasks into 5 types. Factual tasks, which involve finding and sharing information on a factual topic. Personal interaction, which involves an exchange of personal information, such as anecdotes, preferences, values, etc. Fanciful, which involves entering into an imaginary situation, sometimes by taking a role in a role play, and interacting to solve a puzzle or to share information. Critical interactive tasks involve an exchange of opinions on a topic, for example, a discussion or a debate about something controversial. And creative interaction involves students and participants interacting to create a communal poem, story, or other product. And I'll go on now to show you examples of all these tasks. I'll also group the tasks under interaction patterns, ways of interacting, which are quite different online from in the class. So by interaction patterns, I mean in a face-to-face situation, you could have students answering the teacher individually, like teacher-student. You can have students working in pairs, student to student, students working in small groups, or students mingling in a mingling game where they get, like Find Someone Who, where they get up and share information. But the interaction patterns are quite different online from in the classroom. So I'll also group them into different kinds of interaction pattern. So here are some examples, and this is the very practical bit of the talk today. So we'll look first at 2 examples of factual tasks. This is a very, very simple one. And by the way, we're beginning with very simple interaction patterns and very simple tasks, and moving towards more complex ones as the talk goes on. This was called Where in the World Am I? It's a very simple guessing game. The teacher posts a picture of somewhere in the world. It shouldn't be too obvious. I mean, don't post the Eiffel Tower, for example. It should be somewhere not obvious, and the students have to guess. They have a maximum of 25 questions to guess. They can only ask yes, no. So notice the way an example is given. The instruction is, you can only ask yes-no questions. Are you in Europe or Africa? Cross. This is not a yes-no question. Are you in Europe? Tick. This is a yes-no question. And then there are examples below which will help the students make some questions. So very important to give very, very clear instructions, and very important to give some examples of language that the students can use to help them make the questions. So that's probably the simplest type of interaction online. It's just a very, very simple guessing game. Here is another similar interaction, but a little bit more complex. This one involves a private message. You can email the students, or you can send each student a private message with the name of a sport. So, for example, it would say, Paula, volleyball. Francisco, you have football. Okay? So just a simple name of a sport. The student has to write 3 rules for the sport and post them online, but don't say what the sport is. So write 3 rules in one forum post. It says here, remember the language we studied for football rules to help you. I'm imagining that this comes after some input on giving instructions or on the topic of sports and rules in sports. Post your rules by the 16th of July. Notice the deadline that's given. Okay? Important to have a deadline. So after the stimulus, and if you notice in the first, in Where in the World Am I, the teacher posted the stimulus. In this one, the students then post the stimulus. So each student posts a stimulus with 3 rules for a sport. Then the interaction begins to happen. Everybody reads other people's rules and tries to guess the sport. So choose 2 different posts and guess the sport. Post your guesses by the 19th of July. And task 3 is creation. Now you're going to create a sport. Choose 4 rules from different sports and make a new sport with these rules. Give your sport a name. For example, foot basket. That would be a combination of football and basketball. Okay, look at the other sports. Which ones would you like to play and why? So that's a bit more complex. The students post the stimulus, then the students interact by guessing the sport, and finally there's a 3rd phase where they look at what the other students have written and they create their own sport. So this interaction pattern I've called confetti. The teacher posts a stimulus and the students all throw answers at it. Imagine the stimulus, the bride and groom come out of the church and everybody throws confetti. Okay? This would not really work in the classroom. If you just said, where am I, and got everybody to answer, you'd just get this random wall of noise and you wouldn't be able to hear anybody's answers. But because everything happens in a linear fashion online, you can see everybody's answers and everybody can see everybody else's answers as well. So this is what I mean by the fact that interaction patterns online can be ones that don't work in the classroom, but which work well online. So the variation on that very simple one, teacher posts a stimulus, students reply. The variation in sports shorts was teacher posts a stimulus, students reply, students read and interact, and students create. So basic same interaction pattern, stimulus and replies, but it can be varied to be more complex. Okay, going on now to personal. Here's an activity called Foodies. Have you ever noticed how many people post pictures of food that they like on Facebook? Yeah? Perhaps you do too. Okay. So this is an example, an activity about food. So here's a photo I took of a dish, food, drink, meal. Everybody has to post one question. And first of all, the teacher will answer the questions. Okay. So again, this is another example of confetti, a stimulus, and everybody asks a question. Okay. Then interaction, a list of the questions you asked about the food picture. I've corrected the language. You will each post a photo of food in the forum. This can be something you ate, something you like or don't like, something you made. When you've posted a picture, look at the other photos and ask questions to 3 other people about their food photo. Use the questions in the list above to help you. Okay, you have until Friday to do this task. So again, that's an example of confetti. The teacher posts a stimulus, the students ask questions. Then the students post a stimulus, and then they respond. asking questions. Here's another one, this or that. If I said, what do you like best, cats or dogs? What would you say? Dogs. The dogs were a bit quicker on the response, weren't they? Okay. So the teacher writes two things, and you need to choose which one you prefer. Write the name of the thing you prefer and use one of the expressions. For example, travelling by bus or travelling by train? What would you say? Bus or train? Train. Yes, me too. Train, much better. Okay. If you don't like travelling by train and you don't like travelling by bus, you can write neither. Okay. Now it's your turn. Think of two things that are different but related. The first person who's ready can post their two things. The next person responds, then posts their two things. Okay. So this is now taking us into a different interaction pattern, which is like a chain reaction. First person posts two things, the next person replies, then posts two things. So it's sort of like a chain reaction. And I called that one pass the parcel. Do you know the children's game at a party? The children pass the parcel. When the music stops, you can unwrap it and then you pass it on. So this one is the teacher posts a stimulus, student 1 replies and posts the next stimulus. Student 2 replies and posts the next stimulus. Student 3, and so on. So it's reply, post the next stimulus, reply, post the next stimulus, like a chain. You get the parcel, you unwrap it, then you pass it on. I'll now look at some activities from Fanciful. So we've looked at factual and we've looked at personal. In these ones, in Fanciful, the students are asked to enter the realm of the imagination, okay? And to play a role or solve a puzzle, or just simply play around with imagination. This first one, almost superpower, is another example of pass the parcel. In this activity, one person posts a superpower, for example, I can fly, but the next person has to make a condition to make it less powerful. For example, but you can only fly 1 meter off the ground. Then, again, it's a chain reaction, pass the parcel. Add your own superpower in the same post. Then another person does the same. Continue until everyone has posted one superpower. I'll just show you how it works with my handy assistant, who happens to be in the audience. This is Charlie, sorry to everyone, my husband. Charlie, I can read people's thoughts.
Yes, but you can only read the thoughts about money ones. I can speak to animals.
Yes, but you can't understand the replies. Okay, so you see how it works. You mention a superpower, somebody puts a condition on it, then mentions their own superpower, and again you have a chain. Coming on now to some more complex, more difficult complex activities, which require more staging and different interaction patterns. So here's a murder mystery. It begins with a scenario. The murder happened in the house of Paul and Marion Brown. Paul was found dead. He'd been stabbed with a carving knife. He was found at 11 p.m. by his wife, and the police put the time of the murder at 10:30 p.m. That evening, the Browns had 4 guests. Their old friends, Amy and John Jones, Marion's brother, Tom, and a school friend of Marion's, Marie Smith. So the students all get the same scenario. It's in a public post. If you imagine Facebook, it's on Facebook for everybody to read. Then the teacher has to private message or email each student with a numbered clue. So every student gets a clue with a number on. Okay? So for example, Anna gets clue 1, Paolo gets clue 2, and so on. The student with clue 1 should begin, so they post their clues in order. So when all the students have all their clues, Anna with clue 1 begins, and she posts the clue. For example, this is not from the story, but this is an example, the window was open. The possible posts are, the murderer might have got in through the window, or he might have come in through the door and left by the window. Okay, this is an activity that practices modals of deduction, past modals of deduction. Okay, I thought you might like to see an actual example, because we trialled it with A couple of teachers in Auckland trialled it with their students for us. And here was one actual example from students. So student 1 posts, there were no fingerprints on the knife. Another student writes, oh, then the murderer might have worn gloves. And the third student posts, or maybe the murderer was an alien who doesn't have fingerprints. I thought that was really nice. And the fanciful activities do encourage the students to use their imagination and be creative in ways that sometimes the more factual activities don't. I call this interaction pattern poker. It's something is laid on the table, in this case a clue, and the students take turns to post a stimulus and the others react to what's been laid on the table. Critical. Here's a discussion activity about climate change called Yes But. The challenge is you're going to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of various solutions to climate change. First, read some material from the list and work individually to list possible solutions to climate change. So this means the students, first of all, get some reading material. If you're doing a blended learning class, or a face-to-face class even, you can give them the material for homework or give them a reading list in class. If you're doing it wholly online, you can just find a list of possible readings online, sources online about climate change. So the students, first of all, do some reading, and they work individually by themselves at home, okay, to do the reading. Then the teacher divides them into 2 groups, an advantages group and a disadvantages group. And for this, you would need 2 closed groups. If you think of Facebook, for example, it's very easy to make a closed group. That's like a private group. So say you have 16 students in your class, you can have 8 in group A for advantages and 8 in group B for disadvantages. And the groups are closed, they're secret, so they can't see the other people's groups. It's a bit like dividing people into 2 groups in a class. So the advantages group have to list all the advantages of their solutions, and the disadvantages group have to list all the disadvantages of their solutions. And they have to post the list by, and you specify a date. In the 2 groups, share some of the arguments you've read. So this preparation phase, they interact in 2 groups. So the advantages group are discussing advantages, the disadvantages group are discussing disadvantages. Then for task 3, which is interaction again, you divide them into pairs. And this is where you need a private message facility, again, like the one on Facebook. So they work in pairs. A has advantages, and B has disadvantages. Okay? So in each pair, there is one who came from the advantages group and one who came from the disadvantages group. Student A begins and posts a recommendation. For example, to stop climate change, we should, or climate change would be slowed if we, and student B replies beginning yes, but. Yes, but if we did that, we would, or yes, but people wouldn't. Student A then replies again, yes, but, with an argument in favour of the solution. The person who can continue with the yes, buts the longest is the winner. Okay? So the one who has the most yes, buts is the winner of the argument. Okay? So as you can see, the interactions are getting more and more complex. Here we have not only division into 2 groups, but then a regrouping of the 2 groups into pairs, which is quite easy to do in the class, but needs a little bit of thought if you're doing it online. I call this interaction pattern 4, I call breakout room. The students work in 2 closed groups, and then they regroup into pairs, an A and a B for follow-up. Okay? So it's like students go into a different room, they break out, and then they come back again in a kind of a different grouping. Here's another critical one. This one is called Create a Constitution. So the challenge is they have to post a rule or a law, and you can invent a name for the country. Okay? So for example, it is illegal to keep dogs. So it begins with everybody posts a law, and the law can be as far-fetched or as silly or as ridiculous as you like. Interaction. Everybody reads each other's laws, and they vote for any that they particularly like. If a law gets 3 votes, it's passed, and it becomes part of the country's constitution. You can discuss the laws, you can try to get votes. This is very topical in Portugal at the moment, I guess. I've seen you have an election for a mayor or something in Lisbon, is that right? You can try to get votes as hard as you can, and you can also pass laws that undo previous laws. So there's no rules for this, it's a free-for-all, just like a proper election. You can discuss the laws, you can try to get votes for your law, and you can pass other laws that undo previous laws. So you have until 15th February to post the laws, to comment, to discuss, and to vote. Okay? So it's a kind of free-for-all, absolute chaos, but a lot of fun. So people are continually trying to get votes for themselves, arguing against other laws, passing laws that undo previous laws, and at the end you see what you've got left for the Constitution. This interaction pattern I call postal ballot. The students post, students read and vote, and then they discuss and they try to reach a consensus. So again, a different interaction pattern for that one. And the final couple of activities I'll show you are creative. So in creative activities, the students actually work together to write a story together, or to make a poem, or some other kind of text, like a letter or an advert, but they create something together. And I'll show you two different activities. One where the students produce their own artifact, their own product, a poem, and then they comment on each other's. And another one where they actually collaborate to write a story together. So here's the first one. We're living in New Zealand at the moment, and since moving there, I've been absolutely fascinated because people have a great degree of latitude towards making up their own or buying their own number plates. You can have letters, all letters, or some letters and numbers. As long as you have 6, you can have whatever you want. Okay? So here are some real number plates that I saw in New Zealand. The first one, I did it. The second one, not old. Okay, what do you think the third one is? Can you read it? Yeah, why be slow? Okay. What about the next one, the fourth one? No, it's a bit more difficult, isn't it? It's baby, I owe you too. Quite a story behind that one. Was his. Okay, what about the next one? Determined, yeah. I miss you, and out of work, yeah. Okay. So I sometimes sitting in a traffic jam or sitting at the traffic lights, I look at these number plates and I think, who is that person? What's the story behind that number plate? So, for example, here's a photo of one that I took. Not old. How old do you think that person is? Old or young? Old, yes, that's what I thought too. And what do you think the story behind it is? When do you think they bought it? When they retired, yes, that's what I thought as well. I thought that's a cheerful number plate for when you retire. So the first stage of that activity is discussing what the number plates mean, perhaps discussing what not old, or the story behind not old. I've left out, for reasons of space, an example story about a number plate. I saw a number plate called One Extreme, and the little story is about a busker, a street musician called Mario, who was a singer. And he was very poor. He made his living singing on the streets until one day he was talent spotted by an impresario. And now he is a very famous, world-famous opera singer, has plenty of money. And he bought his number plate, One Extreme, to remind himself how he moved from one extreme to another. Okay? So that's an example story. Then the students have to choose a number plate out of the examples you can give them. And there are plenty of pictures of number plates, interesting number plates online. And ask, what do you think the story is behind the plate? Who is the car owner? Why did they create this plate, and what happened in their life? And they write a short, one-paragraph story. Then they read each other's stories, choose one, and maybe post an alternative explanation. So I thought you might like to hear, again, this was one of the activities we trialled with teachers and students in Auckland. I thought you might like to hear what one student wrote. He got the number plate, was his. I don't know if you can see that clearly. So, was his. And this was his story. When he was young, Jack met a materialist girl named Maria. Despite all his true love, he did not have enough money to satisfy her. Then the cold-hearted girl left him to live a happy life with another man, a rich man, breaking the heart of the poor young Jack. Emotionally perturbed by the breakup, Jack became obsessed by money and his revenge, so he worked very hard to earn as much money as possible in order to ruin Maria's husband and buy all their belongings. Currently, Jack is laughing diabolically while driving his big black Maserati, decorated by a vanity plate where we can read, was his. Isn't that lovely? I'm very, very grateful for the student for providing me with such a lovely example. But again, an example of how these creative and fanciful activities can really make students rise to the occasion and produce sometimes language and things that they didn't know they were capable of before. And that sense of student satisfaction when you create a product and there's an end point to the product. Okay, one final, that's what I call interaction pattern 6, writer's group. So students create individually a story, poem, advert, etc., and then they read, react, and comment. Okay? So it's as if you belong to a writer's group, and you're creating something, reading it to the other people in the group, and they're giving you their reactions and comments on it. So that was an activity where students wrote individually and then shared and commented on each other's products. Here's one called a collaborative story, where students actually work together to produce the story. This is, you create a scenario. In this one we chose a hotel. So the Royal Hotel is a 200-year-old institution. Many famous people have visited, and people say it has the best service in the entire world. The hotel is also home to many dark secrets, and some believe a ghost lives in the basement. You're all going to write a story about the Royal Hotel together. So here are the rules. First of all, you invent your character. You write the story from that character's point of view. You can choose any character. You can be a hotel guest, you can be a cleaner, you can be a receptionist, a cook. You could even be the ghost. Just because one person has chosen a guest doesn't mean you can't as well. There are several guests, several receptionists, several waiters. It's up to you who you are. But you have to stay with the same character throughout the story. You can't change characters in the middle. You write in the third person. So, for example, if your character is a guest called Charles, you can write, Charles woke up and went downstairs for breakfast. Not I woke up and went downstairs for breakfast. You write in the past tense. You can't write about another person's character, but you can interact with one another in the story. Your first post should introduce your character into the storyline. We don't all have to start in the same place. So one of you could start as a receptionist who's late for work, another could start as a guest waking up in her room, etc. You'll eventually meet up. Do not post more than once in a row, and you have to have a deadline for the story. So everybody takes a different character and starts making their character do things and then interact with other characters that they meet. Okay? And it's very organic, the way it develops. It's not a set storyline or a set pattern. The storyline just grows out of the characters' interactions. And it's great fun to do. I've done this online in a group. I call that Creative Commons. So students are given rules or a pattern for a collaborative product, and they work together to produce the product. Okay. So, several different types of activity in the 5 types that I outlined: factual, personal, fanciful, critical, and creative, and several different kinds of interaction patterns that are possible to get students interacting online. I'll now look at some feedback possibilities. And remember that the big difference about feedback and assessing students speaking in the classroom and students online By the way, I'm not quite sure exactly what to call the kind of communication that students have online. Is it speaking or is it writing? It seems to me it's something like a fifth skill, something in between speaking and writing. Okay? So I think now with the internet and interaction on computers, we're beginning to look at a fifth skill. Okay? So what's different about the classroom, if you're going around and listening to students speaking in the classroom and giving them feedback on their errors and on their difficulties, you're going around from group to group or from pair to pair, and what you're picking up or what you're listening to is entirely random. You might be listening to one pair who don't have many problems and are producing near-perfect language, whereas over there in the corner, a couple that you're not listening to are having immense trouble and haven't understood how to use the present perfect at all. So it's kind of random what you pick up as you go around and monitor. But online, everything is there. So you can see everything that everyone has said. So it's a very rich source that you can mine to help students, to give them helpful feedback, and to help with error correction and language enrichment. So I'll just look briefly at 3 purposes of feedback. One big purpose of feedback is to encourage students, to give them praise, and to make them feel good, and to give them a sense of achievement. Another one might be to improve their accuracy, to give them help with errors, to give feedback and error correction. And finally, a third way of giving feedback is language enrichment, to encourage them or to give them some different ways of expressing themselves. Encouragement, firstly, is important in the early stages to get the activity going. Praise learners who've contributed and encourage others to join in. Intervene in the action from time to time to respond to content. Express surprise, ask for more information, but just be careful not to take over the activity. The activity is for interaction primarily between students, not between teacher and student. But it is important to encourage the students and to keep them going. And bring the activity to an end when it's finished. Wrap it up by giving some praise for the activity, saying how well they've done, saying what you particularly liked about it. That's important for a sense of closure and a sense of student satisfaction. So the first purpose of feedback is encouragement and praise. Then accuracy. You can correct, you can pick out salient errors or pick out the most important errors and explain them. So for example, since then I spend the best time with my sweet nieces. This is a grammar problem. With since we usually use a different tense. Yes, it should be the present perfect. Since then I've spent, okay? Or I closed my time of being a coordinator. Not a grammar error, but the word choice of close isn't exactly right. It would sound better with finish. I finished my time as a coordinator. So with certain, especially with errors where you think the students couldn't self-correct, for example, I closed my time of being a coordinator, it would be quite difficult for that student to self-correct because he or she obviously doesn't know the phrase finish plus time, plus as, sorry. So particularly in cases where you think it might be difficult for students to self-correct, or maybe if there's a very generalized error, like the use of the present instead of the present perfect, you can correct the errors and give a swift explanation. But students can also self-correct. You can pick out some student-created sentences from the activity, pick out some that are correct and some that are not, and students identify them, identify the ones that are wrong and correct them. You can get students to reread all the contributions and correct any errors that they see. You can create a word cloud with errors, and students create a correct word cloud. So some ways of getting students to correct their own errors online. And finally, as well as correcting errors, you can extend and enrich the student's language. Identify language that students used a lot during the task. Suggest different ways it could be expressed. For example, in Almost Superpower, do you remember the one, I can fly, I can read people's thoughts? You could introduce variants on can. For example, I am able to, or my superpower allows me to, or I have the ability to. Okay? So you can introduce different variants on can. Okay? So 3 ways of giving feedback at the end. And just a reminder that you have a very rich source of data for giving feedback on and for assessing students, because you're able to see everything that everybody has said, unlike in the classroom where you only hear parts of what people say. Okay, just very briefly, the image sources. They're mostly by Pixabay, which is a great source of free images with Creative Commons. The other ones are Creative Commons licenses. It's also a book, and thank you very much for coming.